In today's video, we'll talk about the map array method. And to understand what it does, we first have to think of an example where it can be used. So here we have an example, right? Let's say you have an array of numbers, just plain old numbers. And what you want is actually another array that has every single number from there, but squared, right? How can we actually do that in a very fast manner? Well, mostly the answer that you'll hear is, well, first create a result array, right? Just a simple result array to append the results to, and then you just create a for loop over our initial array. So you can here element of array, and then you have res.push lm times lm, right? And if I try to console log our result, you'll notice, well, I get every single number squared, right? 5 squared is 25, 8 squared is 64, minus 10 squared is 100, and 21 squared is 441. Right, that works, but let's count the number of lines this actually takes. So we have to first initialize the array, then we have to create a for loop, and then we have to push the element to our array. So it's at least 3 lines of code, not taking into consideration the brackets, right? So how can we achieve the same result as this in less lines of code? That's where the map array method comes in. So the map array method is used like so. You have array.map, and here it takes a callback. And this callback function is called for every single element in the array, right? And that element will be found as the first parameter inside our callback function. So we're gonna have here lm, for example, right? So lm is going to be then first 5, then 8, then minus 10, then 21. And what this map array method expects us to do is to give the actual mapping operation to this anonymous function. What's our mapping operation? Well, we're mapping 5 to its square, which is 25, right? We're mapping x to x squared. So our mapping operation is, well, basically this operation right there. What we have to do is return the result of that operation. So you can say return lm times lm, right? And now, if we get the result of this call, just say result equals that, and also console log it, you'll notice if I run this, I'm going to get the same exact result. You don't have to initialize the array, and you don't have to loop over it. Map is going to automatically loop over it. All you have to do is specify the callback function. So before we go over the use cases of this array method, let's deep dive into its functionalities, right? So there's this callback function, right? This one has just one parameter set, right? We're just accepting just one parameter. But in actuality, this callback is being called by the map array method with 3 parameters, and those 3 are in order. The second one is the index, and the third one is our array, right? I'll call it, let's say, inner array, right? So in the index of the elements that we are iterating over, and our array that we're also iterating over, right? So you can console log, for example, our index here, and just say .log index, and we should get, if we run this, we should get all the numbers from 0 to 3, because the map array method actually iterates them in order, right? And you can do operations with this if you want. You can say, okay, we want lm times lm times the index, for example, and that should give us a very strange resulting array. If we run this, you'll notice, well, we get 0 because the first element is at index 0, and we get 64 because 1 times 8 squared is 64, and then we get 200 because this guy is at index 2, so squared is 100, and times 2 is this, and then this guy is probably 21 squared times 3, right? So you can do operations with the index if you so desire without any sort of performance penalty, right? You don't have to figure out your index by using the element inside the array. That's the really neat thing here. And another pretty interesting thing that you can specify here is as the second parameter to the map method. What's the second one? Well, the second one is, well, what's the first one first? The first one is this one, right? So the second one is right after this, and the second argument to this map call can be this parameter to our callback function. So you can specify here, for example, our array. And if we try to then console log this, and you notice that then this keyword inside our function is actually this array. Whatever we pass in here, we can pass in even a string, like say test, and it's going to be a string that's test. That's it. So you can do whatever you want there. One more key thing to note here is that, as you notice, when I passed an array, the initial array didn't get modified at all. So if I run this again after I clear the screen, you'll notice it's just the same array. We didn't actually modify it. So the map array method doesn't do any modifications to the initial array it's called onto. All right, now let's go back to the previous implementation we had. So just the element squared. So I'm gonna remove all this extra stuff that we've added to see all the functionalities, right? And now that we've come to this point, instead of using an anonymous function as the callback, we can actually use an arrow function due to it being much shorter in this case, because we are also just returning the one and only statement inside our anonymous function. So what we can do is just remove the function keyword and just add an arrow here and remove the return and brackets. So just like so. And now we will get the same result. This operation is going to be, the value of this operation is going to be returned, and that's where we get our result. This might be much more familiar than what you have seen so far, right? You've probably seen people use this syntax for the map call because it's usually just one single operation that you have to do per element. All right, so let's go over a practical use case for this map array method. So here I have the test results, which is just an array of objects, and each object has a subject and a grade. And what we want to do with this is take all the grades and add them all up and divide them by the number of grades so that we get an average. How can we do this? Well, using the map method, it can be very, very, very simple. So let's start thinking about the steps for this problem, right? We want first an array of grades, right? How can we get an array of grades? Well, every single object here has a grade, but it's not in any sort of array form. It's in an object. So we want to first extract that inside an array of just numbers. Then we want to probably call reduce to just sum them all up and then divide them by the number of elements. So first, let's start by extracting the grades, right? We can say here test results dot, here we can use map, and for each result, let's say result, we want to extract its grade. We know that result is actually every single object here, and we know that result should have a grade, so we can just say map this to result.grade. And notice here I'm not doing any sort of operation on the object, because we can really return anything here. And in this case, instead of doing an operation, creating a new object or whatnot, we are just extracting a field. And you can do this with the map array method. Once you have an array here, we can just say let res equals that, and also console log this to make sure that it's all okay. Yes, you notice I get an array of our grades 9, 7, and 10. So that works very nicely. And what's the next step? Well, we said that we're going to use reduce to actually calculate the sum of every single grade. If you haven't, if you don't know about reduce, you can check out a video I have made up top about it. But basically it's very simple. So we call reduce. So the first parameter is a callback function. We can have it be an arrow function in this case. And in that arrow function, this guy basically requires two parameters. The first one is the previous value, which is, in our case, the sum. And the second one is the current iterated value. And that's our grade. So you can just say grade. And as a result, we have to just return, well, we have to just add to our sum the current grade. That's all. We don't have to square anything. We don't have to do any sort of operations. We just say sum plus grade. And this is going to propagate over the whole iteration, and it's going to result in just a number, just the sum of all the numbers. And if we try to run this now, you notice I have res equals to this dot reduce. I have the actual sum of every single grade inside our test results. So the last step is to simply divide this by, well, the number of elements. And that actually is, let's say here res slash equals and then test results dot length. And then when I run this, you'll notice I'm going to get the average, which is 8.66 in this case. And because this array method is very, very useful and basically everybody should start using it when the use case arrives, I'm going to go over another example where we have an array of names and what we want is actually objects. We want a list of objects where each object has the property name as our value and also has an ID that we can specify. How can we do this using our map method? Well, to start off, we have to call the map, right? And then we have to create our callback function. It's going to be an arrow function again. So we have here name. And what do we wanna actually create? Well, in our case, we wanna, instead of just, so name is just a string, but we want to actually map it to an object. So we have to create an object for this to work, right? That means we're gonna create an object that says it's going to have the property name here and the value name. And then our ID is going to be our index, which we know we can get from the second parameter of our callback function. Now, due to the way that arrow functions actually work, this is not really valid syntax because it thinks that this is a multi-line arrow function and we should have a return and everything, whereas we actually have an object instantiation. So to actually specify for JavaScript that this is actually what we want an object here, we have to surround this in parentheses. And then, since this is inside parentheses, it's going to be evaluated as an object and returned as a result. Now, if we actually keep this inside a new array and actually console log this, you'll notice that once I run this, we'll get an array of objects. So we know how to get from an array of objects to just an array of numbers or other sort of primitives. We can also get from an array of primitives to an array of objects. Same goes for anything else. You can get from anything else to anything else. You can get from an array of objects to an array of arrays. No problem, right? And as long as it's a one-to-one relationship. You cannot really get an array of objects to just an object using just the map method. Okay? I hope you got something out of this video. I hope this starts motivating you to use the map array method as often as possible. And if you have any questions, do leave them down in the comments below or on our Discord server. Well, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye.